Good morning and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 69th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Jamie Loeb and I'm the Senior Director of Cultural Arts at the JCC. It is my pleasure to welcome you this Tuesday morning to our latest installment of Mitten Mornings, where we'll be speaking with Cindy Frenkel, author of The Plague of the Tender-Hearted. The goal of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair is to bring the best Jewish books and authors from around the world to Metro Detroit, and of course to introduce you to wonderful animals. This year, the rooms we're sitting in may be different, but that purpose remains. Our book fair runs until tomorrow, December 9th, and we have an exceptional lineup of events planned for you throughout today and tomorrow. We hope you'll take a look at our schedule right here at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. You can see all of the events you may have missed, all of the upcoming events, and of course, find a link to our online bookstore where you can purchase Cindy Frenkel's books and a wide assortment of books and gifts. Hanukkah is coming. This year, in order to provide as much programming to the community as possible, we've made all of our events free of charge. So if you enjoyed this event and other book fair events, we hope you'll consider becoming a patron. It is not too late, or giving a donation to book fair. No gift is too small, and of course, we appreciate whatever you're able to do. You can do all of that at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. We rely on community support to make this event happen every year, so thank you in advance for becoming part of the family. We have a really special event for you this morning, and we really want you to be a part of it. So please put your questions in the comment box below or text them to the number on your screen, 248-973-7286. We have a great discussion planned for you, of course, but we will get to as many of your questions as possible. While you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the little reminder bell so you never miss one of our exciting online events. So the focus of today's event is getting to know Cindy Frenkel, author of The Plague of the Tender-Hearted. We are very excited to have her with us this morning for a discussion that I will moderate. She is a Metro Detroit native, and she's written numerous essays, including My Brother and Kate Spade, which was featured in the Detroit Jewish News. She served as a writer-in-residence with Inside Out Library Arts Project, which brings working poets into Detroit public schools and works with the students there. Her poetry has been in numerous journals, and her prose has appeared in publications ranging from Vanity Fair to the New York Observer, where she was a columnist. She co-authored 100 Essential Books for Jewish Readers with Rabbi Daniel B. Syme, and she currently teaches literature and creative writing for video game creators at Lawrence Tech University. Her new book is autobiographical poetry called The Plague of the Tender-Hearted. It's an honest look at the trials and triumphs of family relationships, addiction, shame, suicide, and ultimately hope. So please join me in welcoming this morning to the stage, Cindy Frenkel. Good morning, Cindy.
Jamie, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're so glad to have you. So I gave the audience a little taste of who you are and what you do. It's not often we have a poet at book fair, so welcome. So tell us a little more about yourself and why you wrote this book. Why these poems? Why in this order? What are we on about?
Okay. Well, I wrote this book because 20 years ago this fall, my youngest brother, I'm the youngest of four, I'm the only girl, he died by suicide. And when he was sick, he relapsed. He had been a heroin addict and he'd been clean for 13 years. And it was a big secret. We couldn't talk about it outside of the family. And we hardly talked about it in the family. And my mother was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. And if you looked up the kind of cancer she had, you'd see in general, people who had peritoneal mesothelioma had about 6 months to live. And one of the nicest things my father ever did was didn't tell us, but the oncologist had told him that she had, I think, 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, just dire. So we were all really focused on her. And Tom, this sibling who was the heroin addict, relapsed. And he couldn't imagine life without my mother at the helm. And my dad had a lot of issues that we didn't discuss. And so when Tom relapsed, then he checked himself into treatment, and then he left treatment and broke into the condo he had been renting, and he killed himself. And this is a really heady thing to say early in the morning. It was heady anytime, but he shot himself in the head, and a relative thought it would look better if we had an open casket where people didn't know. So we had an extra large yarmulke cover the exit wound. And Kaufman switched the body's direction. Nobody would ever think like, oh, the body's in a different direction, because it's against Jewish law to even have an open casket. So my family was prominent and consumed with appearances, and I never felt comfortable with that veneer. And it was always very civil, but it wasn't always kind. And they were really good people, but they were trapped in a therapist called the external locus of control, what other people think of you. Mm-hmm. And so I was writing this for years. I went through a sudden divorce. My mother died. I inherited my brother's dog. I mean, it was one thing after another. It was absolutely overwhelming. And I was single parenting, and writing was my balm. It always is. Mm. And so this little chapbook took 20 years to write. And thank God I have a really good life today. And I'm so humbled by the response, and which has been so unexpected for me, and so grateful to be here. And who could have ever predicted that this title, The Plague of the Tenderhearted, would be so fitting, And the cover is, I'm just going to do this, is a portrait of me. Well, it's on your website, that my father did when I was a little girl. So
it's a wonderful story. So it's a wonderful book of poems. And, one of the things I sort of have a love-hate relationship with this fact about poetry is that on the one hand, it can be very revealing of emotions and, experience and so on and so forth, but it doesn't necessarily reveal plot. I mean, sometimes it does, but it's not really designed that way. And so, you and I have had conversations about these experiences that you've had. And after having had that conversation, I can certainly see how that relates to the poetry. But I wonder if you could talk a little more about how writing poetry helped you sort of process all of this trauma and grief.
It's a great question. I think it helped. What was really cathartic was getting it on paper. A lot of the stuff that I wrote, I would never put in a manuscript, because it was my way of getting things out, getting emotions out, which is what I do. I also spent a tremendous of time with animals, volunteering at animal shelters and just hanging out with animals, because they don't want anything back but affection. You don't have to explain anything. Yeah, right? Is that what you said?
I said, don't forget food. They also want food.
And food, that's true. That's true. And so I did that. And then I was thinking about this last night, and this doesn't directly answer your question, but it's another way I handled it. I was crazy in terms of my actions. I opened an antique booth for a year, and I shopped. I would go into Salvation Armies, and I would go into resale shops, and I have a good eye for finding things. I only broke even. I mean, I didn't make a lot, but what I did is I tried to escape. And for years, I've looked for the perfect home. That's the same thing. I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin with my story. So writing was a way for me to process what I went through, and having an editor say they wanted to publish the book and having people interested in reading it validated what I went through. So
you mentioned
it. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that this is a chapbook, which is not a phrase I had heard before, but you were telling me earlier that it's part of a larger work that is still in process. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that larger work?
Well, okay, so this, as you know, is a slim book. It's 33 pages. And a normal poetry manuscript is about, I think, maybe between 48 and 68 or something. I have much more, but it's not fully baked yet.
Mm-hmm.
And this story alone is so complicated, and it's so interbraided what was going on in it, that I had to keep the focus on that trajectory. I couldn't get into everything. So the other manuscript encompasses this and fleshes out even more. So that's what that's about. And, I have a belief in terms of the artistic process, which is you can't rush it, because you don't want to put something out there that you're not going to feel like it's okay later on.
Right.
And there's I have a piece I wrote, it's on my website, called 15 Lessons in 9 Years of Teaching, that I want to expand into a book. And one of the lessons is your life's work has no timetable. And I didn't know that growing up. I thought if you haven't accomplished something by the time I dated someone years ago who went to an art school in England, and the head of the art school said, you can only show promise for so long. And I don't believe that. I think as long as we're on this side of the grass and we continue to grow, things can happen.
There's a famous cellist, I think it was Rostropovich, who people in his 90s, he's one of the most famous cellists ever. He still practiced hours a day, and people say, well, why are you still practicing? Because usually musicians get to a certain point and they just play, right?
Yep.
And he was like, well, I think I'm getting better.
I love that.
So I think that's a wonderful sentiment, that we can always be showing promise.
I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
I bet tomorrow than I was today, or what's the point,
Right. So you mentioned this sort of exciting work that's coming up, but I want to go backwards a little bit, because you mentioned your family was a difficult one to grow up in, because there was a lot left unsaid. There was a certain stiffness that you described. So how did you end up a poet? That is not usually the sort of family that produces poets, or maybe it is because of the reaction. But how did that happen?
I don't know. I always wanted to write, and I loved theater, and I loved the visual art. So those were my three passions. And my parents were big supporters of the arts, and my father had his paintings all over the house, and he collected Rubaiyats of Omar Khayyam.
Mm-hmm.
So I certainly was exposed to the arts through my parents. And to me, writing was the safest outlet, because you didn't have to have an audience. You could write anywhere, anytime. And then I have friends, and when I say friends, I mean lifelong friends, whom, some of them, two I'm thinking of right now, whom I went to elementary school with. And I would call them up and I would read them things I wrote that no one will ever hear except this handful of people. And they would encourage me. And so, you can test the waters. And my family was very loving within limits. They were very controlling. They didn't know any better. They were wonderful people. They weren't bad people. They weren't dishonest, in their business dealings, they were upstanding people in the community. But Jews in that era, I'm seeing this over and over again, Jamie, they could not talk about the Holocaust openly. They didn't feel safe to. They couldn't have problems. If you were prominent in the community, you better look good at all costs. And no one was above reproach. No. And you don't want to air everything either. There are lines of discernment, of course.
Sure.
So the other thing that happened to me is I had a relative who did not want me to mention suicide or heroin, and worried that it would affect his business. This was 20 years ago. The stigma was much worse than it is today. And I complied because I didn't want to lose any more family. And that was really unhealthy for me. And my mentor is a therapist who, I found a card. It said, if you were my therapist, and you open it up, it says, I couldn't afford you. And I told her that. We crack up about that because her name's Marcia Furstenfeld. 557-8621. She's local. And she's sort of reparented me. She's an imago therapist. And we were talking last night about this interview and my being nervous. And she told me this quote that apparently is from Brene Brown. And I said, I have to write it down and say it tomorrow. And the quote is, pain that is not transformed will always be transmitted.
Ooh.
Is that great?
Yes. So, since you've mentioned therapy, I want to give you a little soapbox here because, the poems of this book are very much partially a description of trauma, but also a sort of working through of that trauma.
Yeah.
And in our previous discussions, you've mentioned the role of therapy in your own healing from that. And so I just want to, give you a soapbox for a minute to talk about the importance of recognizing trauma, healing from it, seeking help. Because I think as much as the stigma around seeking professional help for your mental health issues and addiction and suicide, some of that stigma has dissipated over the years, but we still, we need to talk about it more. These things are part of the world.
Oh, there's no question. And I'm so pleased you're giving me this opportunity, because if you have a broken leg, you go to an orthopedic surgeon. You go to the expert to help you. You don't sit around and hope your leg heals by itself. And when you've had trauma, you go to an expert. And I've done a trauma. Okay, so I'm gonna digress, and I'm gonna talk about our interview because I told a couple friends because it was just so. So when you get interviewed for the book fair, they give you. I learned this morning 10 minutes, but I thought I had a 15-minute slot. And I was speaking to 3 women. Jamie, you're the only one I had met before, and I met you fleetingly. I didn't know you well. And I was telling this story, and I was feeling extremely vulnerable. My brother, the exit wound, the extra large yarmulke, this prominent family, my not feeling comfortable in my own family in many ways. And I said, but I want you to know, you were all looking at me like this was so much loss. This is really intense. And I said, wait a minute. The book is also hopeful. My life today, thank God, is really good. And I've done a tremendous amount of work on myself and a tremendous amount of therapy. And here I had 3 women looking at me via Zoom on the screen. And they're all going like this. And I'm thinking, I'm envisioning both my parents in their respective individual caskets, simultaneously rolling over individually as I'm telling you this, just complete vulnerability. And then you cut me off and you said, we'll get back to you. And I said, when will I hear? And you said soon. And I said, how soon? And you said soon. And I thought, well, I can't push it anymore. It'll be obnoxious. And I thanked you. We got off the phone and I had the biggest shame shower. How dare I talk about therapy? And I really believe that both my parents, if there is a soul, and I do believe there is, they're more evolved now, and they're proud of the work I've done, and they're rooting for me, as Tom is too, So, but boy, did I, and I had a whole narrative, like I should never have said that. You weren't interested one bit, and that very night I got an email saying, we're delighted to, so just the opposite. So you never know. And so I'm a big believer in therapy, but it's got to be the right therapist, because I've had therapists who weren't as skilled as others. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, what I went through is something called complex trauma. So I had PTSD, but it's complex because there were so many things intertwined. Mm-hmm. And I had to break them and figure out what happened before that led up to this, because things don't happen in a vacuum. Right. And the other thing is, and I've seen this with several of my brother's friends, there are plenty of people who are in recovery, who are sober and clean 30 years later, 35 years later. They work really good programs. And so I'm a big believer in 12-step programs. And I'm not an alcoholic, but Bill B did say, the founder, one of the co-founders of AA, this program will work if you believe in God. This program will work if you don't believe in God, but this program won't work if you think you are God. You know? So I know that I'm just this little drop in the bucket on this planet during this time. I don't have this, illusion that I'm anything more. And that, I think, has given me great comfort that there is a beneficent force in the universe. So, and when people need to get help. And in the Jewish community, by the way, the stigma was so bad.
Yeah.
And I wish that it would not only go away, I wish people would be really proud, because it takes so much courage to do the work.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, I have met some of the finest people I've ever known in my whole life on this journey. I mean, just therapists. There's a therapist I'm still in touch with. I went away to a place in Tennessee after my brother's death that dealt with trauma. And, people said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, my brother put a bullet through his head and everyone thought he overdosed. And my mother's dying right now." I didn't know I was going to get divorced. I didn't know anything. Anyhow, so, and the other thing I think is equally important to therapy is having really great friends and never, ever losing your sense of humor. And if you forget that you only have the present, then you're in trouble. If you're always living the past or you're always living in the future. I feel so privileged to be sitting here talking to you this very moment.
Well, we are so glad to have you here. And, it's funny that in that interview, we wanted to listen. So we weren't saying anything, right?
Yeah.
And, the three of us were thinking, wow, she's done a lot of work and she's come out the other side, right? We were all just sitting there impressed. And it's interesting how, and I don't think this is just about your personal reactions. I think for a lot of people, we assume what other people are thinking about us and act accordingly. And I think it's so helpful to be able to discuss afterwards, to say, I thought you were thinking this, and to hear, oh no, I was thinking that, right? That kind of open communication is just so important. And I think, I think there's probably also some generational difference in that, friends of mine that have gone through traumatic experiences and sought help and, sort of healed from here. They often come out the other side feeling very proud and talking about it in a way that is so refreshing. So I'm wondering, how have you seen that change over your journey in terms of the way other people talk about their experiences?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. How other people talk about what they've been through?
Right. So you've gone on your own journey in terms of like, don't talk about it. And then, working on yourself, working through therapy, so on and so forth, and then talking about it.
Yeah.
And that's been a long journey. And so how have you seen the sort of culture around you change?
Yeah, it's huge. So right now, I talk in the classroom about suicide, awareness and prevention. And when that piece came out about Kate Spade and my brother, I thought Lawrence Tech needs to know. I'm teaching all these creative writing classes this semester. Oh, by the way, I'm just digressing, but when I worked it was Inside Out Literary Arts Project, not Library Arts Project. And when I worked there, that really helped too, because anytime you get outside of yourself and you help other people, of course, your problems recede. And it puts things into perspective, because I was working with kids in dire poverty and I was not worried about my next meal or a roof over my head. So, that was always in the forefront and the background in my mind. But the thing in terms of the trajectory of change, a friend of mine's mother, I think her name was Marie LaRue, said to her daughter, who's a therapist, you know, honey, in our day, we didn't have Oprah. We didn't talk about feelings. And there's an Eleanor Roosevelt quote. I'm going to get it wrong. I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's people talk about there are three levels of communication. The lowest form is talking about people. The next form is talking about events, and the highest form is talking about ideas. My family was always talking about people. There was a lot of I didn't know the term Lashon Hara, but there was a lot of gossip. One of my favorite relatives used to say, "Know any new gossip?" And I used to joke with my friends. There was a needlepoint pillow I saw like in a catalog. It said, "I don't repeat gossip, so listen carefully." You know, and there was another line, "If you don't have anything nice to say, sit by me." That wasn't my family's. I mean, they weren't mean like that, but they had a biting. They could be mean. I shouldn't say they weren't mean. They were tough. And I was considered overly sensitive. So, and you know, then I have to think, where did that come from? How were they raised?
Right.
You know, this was the greatest generation, right? These were the men who fought in World War II, both my grandfathers came over here. You know, one survived the pogroms and peddled. I mean, you just pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, and you were grateful you had a nice roof over your head, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, the pressures to appear perfect, I mean, that's not a societal pressure that has gone away. And I suspect, though, obviously I have no real experience being in a non-Jewish family, but I suspect it is more the norm in Jewish families, that sort of expectation of excellence. And that's not always an unhealthy thing, to be clear. Wanting and expecting your children to grow up and be wonderful is not necessarily an unhealthy thing. It obviously can turn into a toxic environment. So we do have a question from one of our viewers about basically, as I said before, being so impressed with your courage and the way you've come through this trauma. And she wants to know, Naomi wants to know, where do you think your strength comes from?
First of all, I thank you. I have remarkable friends, and I do believe in a loving creator. And I had the incredible privilege of being with both my parents when they died. And one of my brothers was with me when my mother transitioned, but he wasn't with me when my dad did. And I think when you see someone you love actually die, you realize this life is so precious and so short. And we spend so much time worrying about things that aren't worth it. I have a nephew he's a neurosurgeon, and he told his mother once, you know, is this gonna be important in 5 years from now? Is this worth really worrying about? You know, right size the problem. And with Tom, this is a guy who, in a family that didn't discuss addiction, was sober from heroin for 13 years. What a remarkable accomplishment. And my father was really shut down emotionally. And I've gravitated toward women, especially, who have reparented me. And my mother and I were super close, and she had a great sense of humor. But she was this refined, very dignified, kind of waspy woman. You know, I joked last night to Marcia. I said, yeah, I came from a prominent family. I had a prominent nose. You know, my nose was bad. My hair should be straight. I wasn't okay, you know? So I remember when I was an underling at the New Yorker, I used to straighten my hair every day. And one day it was just like 100 degrees out and super humid. And I showed up at work and my hair was all ringlets. There was no reason to try to straighten it. Yep. And one of the cartoonists there said to me, "Oh my God, I love your hair." And I said, "It's natural." And he didn't believe me. And the next day I wore it straight again. He was like, "Why would you ever straighten it?" And I didn't know it was okay curly. Well, you know, you believe what you're told. There's a Yogi Berra line. It's not what we know, it's what we know that just ain't so.
Love it. Yeah, one day, you know, we'll have you back to talk about your next book about how hair straightening is a mark of oppression, because it's one of those weird things that, like, I feel like so many people are taught as kids, especially women, that like, oh no, you need to straighten your hair. And I used to try, I mean, not with a straightener when I was young, but like I would brushing it all the time, and it's just a pain. It's just a lot of work.
And by the way, saying that we're okay the way we are, imperfect, is huge.
Well, I don't think curly hair is imperfect.
No. I don't either. But I was realizing when I was getting dressed this morning for this interview, nothing seemed right, and I shifted back to when I would get dressed to go to Franklin Hills, you know, with my family. I had to look perfect, and it never felt good. Like, I just want to show up as, be human. That's all I am. You know, I'm gonna bumble through life, and I love that Jewish law says give people the benefit of the doubt too. You know, that's a commandment. I mean,
I love that one. Yeah, I think so. Let's all just bumble through life together. So we have reached the end of our time. So I want to say thank you, Cindy Frenkel, for being with us this morning. You can pick up a book, a copy of her book at our online bookstore. The direct link is here in the comments. Of course, you can also find a link on our website. So thank you again, Cindy. It's been wonderful speaking with you. And thank you to all of you watching at home. Our next event is today, Tuesday, December 8th at 11 a.m. I will be talking with Phil M. Cohen, and Jamie Crackover about Jews in futurist fiction. It should be a lot of fun. Again, you can see the full schedule here at culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. While you're here at the YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, hit the reminder bell, all those YouTube things. Have a great day.